So I'm going to begin with a word of prayer today, and then we're going to be looking at T.F. Torrance's Theological Science. We do thank you, our God, that while the world seems to be in turmoil, we turn to you as the still point in a troubled world, that in you we find a peace, that actually your science, the minds you give us to investigate and know you, gives us a beginning place to understand the world and who we are in it, and that which we have control over and that which we do not. So give our hearts and our minds a calm as we come to you, that we might walk out more apt at being your servants and speaking and bringing your peace to the world. Do this, we pray, in your name, you who is Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.
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 So just for getting going here, we are starting into chapter 3 today of Theological Science. And we are going to look at Ken's fine outline for us, and he's done a really nice job of doing some catch-up work. If you haven't yet downloaded that from the Facebook reading group page, you might want to do that. So we're grateful to Ken again for his work that he's done in this handout, and also for leading us through today. I actually had the pages kind of wrong on what really should be there. We're going to go from 106 to 116. So we've got 10 rich pages to engage here. And hopefully you will feel free to raise your hands and engage and ask questions. Again, our intent here is to get people who have read Theological Science and said, I don't get it, or people who've never read it and they read the first couple of sentences and go, I don't know if this is for me. So we want to make sure that we just are clear. There's no dumb question. Every question that helps clarify what's going on is what it is that this reading is attempting to really get at. So we will think deep and rich thoughts, but we want to make sure that we're always serving those out there who need the help of seeing what is not obvious. So, Ken, I'm going to pass it to you and have you do a beautiful job of walking through, just setting the stage for us, as you've done in this handout, as to where we are in the book as we enter chapter 3.
Okay. Hi. Who's had a chance to read Torrance, this part chapter? Yep. Good. All right. Yeah, I quote Torrance in the handout in a couple places rather extensively. So as you get, if you can get it out or have it with you or bring it up on another screen, you may find that useful. Because I tried
If anyone would like us to read something, we can read those out loud just to make sure people don't get lost if they don't have a copy.
Yeah, and there are a few typos. There is something of, I forget who it was that said, they apologized for the length of the memo. They said, I would have made it shorter, but I didn't have time.
I think that was Mark Twain.
I would have had fewer typos, but I just didn't have time to proof it one more time. So I'll call them out if we hit them. You'll probably sit there and going, that sentence needed an object. The preposition's missing. Something that just put of or something in there, and that is all right. So broadly, Elmer Collier calls this a methodological book, and several times in the opening 100 pages, we're 100 pages into this already. That's almost a third of the way. He keeps saying, I don't want to address that particular doctrinal issue. I don't want to address that particular theological formulation. I'm not looking at the dogmatics. I'm looking at the method. I want to demonstrate that theology is a rational method for approaching God. So there is such a thing as theological science. And he knows that if you use the word theology among scientists, you get creeped. And if you use science among theologians, you get creeped. Nobody's comfortable with putting those two words together. That was true back in the 60s. It's still true today. But he's going to make his case. I can say that plenty of people like Collier Very, very smart people have been persuaded. This is my copy of How to Read T.F. Torrance. I read the sections. I went through the footnotes, and every time he cites theological science, I read that paragraph. And it is interesting. He will say eventually that theological science as a book is a starter book, believe it or not. I mean, he wrote it when he was like 53, 54 years old, but it's now considered one of the early books. Collier calls it one of a trilogy of books essentially on theological method. He led off with theological science. He did space, time, and incarnation. And then he did God and Rationality. And this is a collection of essays. This is a collection of essays and lectures, all of them based on work he did for this book and pulled out during one of the 3 rewrites in order to get this thing done and off to the publisher. I commented last time that I thought it interesting that this is when he published this book, this was the longest book he had ever published. It's 350 pages, I think. Yeah. By far, it is longer than anything else he did. And I suggested, I think that he thinks in essay length increments. And
I have a quick question.
Sure.
It says that the book is based on the Hewitt lectures for 1959.
Right.
Can you address a little bit of the relationship between that? And do we have the original lectures and how much advanced or modified the book is compared to the lectures?
All good questions. I don't have really good answers, though I wish I did. I am assuming, and Marty, you may know, if the original Hewitt lectures in TypeScript are in the Torrance papers at Princeton.
I've not been in the Princeton collection enough to know if they're there or not. Mike Hobbits might know that.
Finding aids cover that kind of stuff? I would think they're finding aids. If you put in Hewitt lecture, right, you should get something.
Yeah.
Just a very quick answer. There's a 10-year gap between the lectures and the publication of the book,
right,
which means that this dear man chewed on it, and he didn't just cover a few typos. He covered whole sections and paragraphs and streams of thought, shall we call it?
Yeah. And therein is probably a doctoral dissertation to document the creative evolution of his thought from the way he put it in 1958 and how they finally put it out the door in 1968. It's because he was constantly developing, and the people that were coming to New College, some of them he persuaded to write books on science and theology to sort of back him up on some of the things he was saying. We've read several of them as a group last year.
All 12 of them. All 12.
So I was thinking of the okay, all 12. Getting the methodology down at this point was the thing that seems to have concerned him the most. And in the preface to this book, he says, when I got home, having delivered the lectures, and I've been on the campuses of all 3 of the schools that where he lectured: Union Theological Seminary in New York, Andover Newton Theological Seminary in Newton Center, Massachusetts, and the third one is
it Princeton?
No. Andover, Union, and Episcopal Theological School, Cambridge. 2 of those 3 schools are closed, and the third one is on the ropes. So this is to let you know that doing high-level, sophisticated theological thinking does not pay the bills. at least not in a standalone seminary in the United States. You got to go to Oxford, you got to go to Cambridge, you got to go someplace where you're getting state subsidies, because it's just not working anymore. But his argument here, and I'd say in his preface, he says that his dual subjects are to be theology and science. He wants to clarify the process of scientific activity in theology. And he wants to defend what does he mean by scientific activity? What does he mean by theology? Those are the two main variables that he's proposing. So in his first chapter, he goes to the theology, and he says, I'm going to assert that the goal of a theological science, properly understood, is to assert a knowledge of God that is actual, objective, and therefore possible. He says this is the inverse of the way most people in Boston or New York or even Princeton sometimes would put the question. They say, let's just see, can we say that theology is even possible? And then if we can convince ourselves that it's possible on some other grounds, then we'll see if it is actual. He says, no, you're getting it backwards. It's not how most people do theology honestly and truly, and it's not how scientists do science. So no scientist is going to ask you before you study physics that it's whether or not it's possible to study physics. That's given. The question is, how are you going to study physics that adds to the overall knowledge of you and your colleagues as you press forward on the frontiers of science? So he gets that there. So having clarified what he means to do the book, what he means by theological science, he has a second chapter, which is rather long, where he sketches 4 aspects of the history of theology and science in the Western world in order to illustrate how the two disciplines of theology and science, and specifically Christian theology and Western science, have inhibited and contributed to their mutual development up to the present day. You cannot cover 2 millennia lickety split. So he dips in, and there is one of the essays he publishes about a year before he publishes this book is one where he just restricts himself to how Reformed theology, that is theology in Calvin's day and thereafter, and science got along more or less for the first 200 years or so. And I've got shelves of books on all that kind of stuff. And we had a lot of fun playing with that before. But the main point he's trying to make is that kind of long-term conversation would have gone sterile and dead if there was no relationship between theology and science. So he's taking that as a historical evidence that they are related. Now the question is how, and what do we learn from that? There's a lot more stuffed in there, and every once in a while he'll throw in a Cartesian dualism or something just to make sure we're still awake. That's what that gets us up to this third chapter. And having looked at theology, having looked at the interaction of theology with science, he now is going to look at science and in its methodology. And again, he's not trying to come up with a full-blown philosophy of science. There are people who write books like that, and they're down in the footnotes. He's just trying to hold up what most people who study science for a living and have done work on the epistemology and the development of science and the history of science. Again, I've got shelves of books. I can show it to you. I said prior to this that so far Tom is not going to find that or believe that many people are going to sit there and go, you can't say that. You can't say that. You're way out there speculating, because he says, no, I'm not. Look at my footnotes. We've been talking about this for 60, 70 years. I'm just organizing it here in order to make a point that there now is a broad consensus of scientific methodology. And I'm going to allege in subsequent chapters that theological science sticks to that methodology where it's appropriate to its unique subject, namely God. which is, I mean, that is his thesis. That is what he is trying to prove. So let's have a look. What is it? Where Tom turns specifically to the nature of scientific activity in this third chapter. What is scientific method? How does theology qualify as a scientific method? How does this inform our understanding of theological science? He says, quote, "It is important for us to clarify," this is page 107, "it is important for us to clarify our understanding of scientific activity and to distinguish clearly the special requirements of theology as a science in its own right from those other sciences such as physics, biology, or history." He's got two points he wants to make. Theology is a science, but it's a unique science. It shares a lot with the other sciences, and they share a lot with it, but they don't all dive in together in one complete package, because that is not the way science works. And it wouldn't be a theology if we tried to do that. We'd have to dummy everything down to get it to fit into little tiny shoe boxes. Not going to do that.
Can you clarify one thing? He mentions on the page before scientism. Can you contrast what he's seeing as scientism versus what he's calling science as he goes forward?
Scientism was an intellectual fad in the Victorian age, as science, especially as technology. Let's just look at Great Britain. Great Britain in 1800, everything was lit by fire, powered by steam, and you rode horses to get from place to place. It was pretty much the same as it had been 100 or 200 years prior to that. And by the year 1900, 100 years later, everything's lit by electricity. The steam is now harnessed to railroads that cover everything, and then there are canals, and there are even electronic communications like the telegraph that are beginning. He's saying that is the technological / practical application of science that most people looked at as proving the truth of science. Then there was the then think, well, then what do we do about all these other truths we've been arguing about for centuries? Scientism says if it can't be reduced to a science, and here they mean almost, if you can't find the mathematics at the root of it to show that it is mathematically logical, that it be said that this is true or this is not true, it doesn't really exist, or it's just not worth studying. So scientism was I calling it an intellectual fad. Occasionally, Tom will allude to it because there are still people out there. You might sit across them in a dining room table sometime. Say, if it's not scientific, I don't need to hear about it, because it's either myth or poetry or children's stories. It's not anything I'm interested in. We can all go see Elf for Christmas, because why not? If it's all poetry, it's all feel-good stuff, and Jesus doesn't have anything to do with it, that's post-scientism.
So would the new atheist then be a modern rendition of scientism?
No. Because ironically, the new atheists continue to be extremely critical of scientism, those who believe in scientism, because they are arrogantly claiming what they simply cannot prove. And the new atheism says an honest agnosticism has more intellectual integrity than a scientism that claims far more than it could possibly demonstrate. I think that's fair. Bryden, whistling here.
Well, Dwayne goes first.
Dwayne,
and then I do
Dwayne
have
has
something to
his
say.
hand up. We'll
sorry,
get
Dwayne, I didn't see your
Dwayne, and then
hand.
we'll get Bryden's response to that question. Go ahead, Dwayne.
Yeah, no, I'm just picking up what I learned from Bryden. Because the thing is, we use this language all the time, but it's not because we know this stuff, but we never get, can you tell me what this means? But so scientism is a problem that's been this monolith it's all imagination. Because you show me those numbers. Because you got naturalism and connecting, because science then it gets funneled in, and you can only know what you can observe. Well, where does the supernatural come in? And so, like, you've got transcendence. They can't handle transcendence. Peter Berger and his social stuff, and then you've got utility, pragmatism. The fact that it's a closed system, and that's why, like Ken is saying, like with the new atheism, you're because people just do their shorthand answer. They think it's science, but it's scientism. So if Tom would have lived longer and seen the end results of all the avant-garde stuff people are doing in the name of quote unquote science, it's scientism. And it has a religious component because it criticizes everything so that it can't be true, or the possibility of being true, because it's a closed system. So once these people get caught in their scientism, you have a hell of a time trying to get them out of their cave.
No, it's virtually a fundamentalism of reason, and it very quickly gets tedious and boring. It's not very inspiring. You see a lot of people sitting there flogging it to death over beer and Skittles. It's a real
Who
shame.
would the figurehead today be of scientism that's still functioning?
Oh, geez. Yeah, ask Siri. Let me see here.
Well, Marty,
Hey, Siri.
it's the academy. It's all postmodernism, because there's no such thing as truth. Well, that's scientism. Yeah, they say they prove everything, but yet we can't say anything because we can't prove it, and there's no truth. Like it's ridiculous.
Okay. So, Brighton, we're going to go to you and see if you want to answer the question that was put out to you.
Well, I mean, I think it's very useful to focus on these terms, because I have some other stuff for later, perhaps, Ken.
Yeah.
Positivism as a tradition is a spin-off of scientism, in my understanding of things. You go back to Victorian England, I go forward a little bit, because positivism and a positivistic attitude to things is terribly strong in the first part of the 20th century. And it erupts in areas of history, it erupts in areas of geology and so on. And it's a mood that I believe is still perniciously with us culturally, even though it's been well and truly kicked into the bucket academically. Whether you go back to the verification principles of the Vienna Circle and blah, blah, that's the 1920s, for goodness sake. I mean, we gave it up then, you idiots. Well, no, we didn't. And it's a very curious thing how these moods, I want to call them moods, they're a mindset that humans, well, Dwayne talked about caves, they're refuges of the mind, partly because we're lazy, partly because we're trapped by sin, partly because we're herd animals, and it's a hell of a lot easier to run with the herd than to actually think. I mean, thinking is difficult.
No.
It's hard work, Ken. This chapter, I mean, thank God, in one sense, I'm reading the chapter now in my 8th decade and not in my 3rd decade. It would have spun me out. Enough.
So, just to clarify your positivist statement, I only can believe what I see. Is that when you say the positivist, I'm limiting myself to only believing what I can see and what can be proven to me. It's kind of a form of empiricism. Does that follow what you're thinking there? I want to understand the glasses that you're talking about.
Of course, positivism, as I understand it, and that's a big caveat, is about forms of demonstration that are not just simplistic in the Einsteinian way that Ken's going to introduce us to, but are simplistic because they're actually reductionist. Okay. So there's an element of reductionism as well, I suspect, again and again and again, because all they want is just, well, they want to have a happy time. And if booze works,
Checking.
Sorry, I mean, it can be that basic. at a cultural mood level.
Yeah.
Right. It's not a word we use often, so
Just
go
as
ahead.
a matter of method today, it says let us stick to the topics that Tom brings up today in this text, because he may bring up positivism in the next chapter, and I don't know that because I haven't read the next chapter yet.
He does bring it up in this chapter. It's Eyre he
Oh,
replaced
yeah.
John Murray at Edinburgh, and he was the logical positivist that McMurray spent a lot of time then saying, "What in the world are you people doing? I gave you an investigative, discovering kind of philosophy, and you went for him." So, and he is in the footnotes and Polanyi's engagement. These are all in this chapter. So,
Yeah.
it is part
Okay.
of today's discussion. So,
Yeah.
And
I was
very
just looking in
quickly,
the index. The word positivism, the term, doesn't appear in the index. So I'm
right. Yeah, Eyre would be the representative of that, I think.
yeah.
But,
And I had to
Brian, did you
read
want to say one?
Eyre back in college. I had to read Rene Descartes, Discourse on Method, and I had to read parts of David Hume, and I had to read Eyre on logical positivism, and it was boring. Oh my God, it was boring. Can he possibly believe that this kind of thin description does any justice to any real human life? And in the meantime, we had the civil rights revolution going on. We had the anti-war revolution going on. We had the sexual revolution going on. Nobody was enjoying listening to A.J. Eyre. The teacher had to sort of like give it up and say, "I'm sorry, I even assigned it," and dropped it in the bucket.
Eyre is inhuman. That was a pun.
can I quickly add a footnote? I've had the dubious privilege of being an external examiner, as was dear Eyre, in the 1980s at the University of Zimbabwe. Now, I mean, here's a quick story that is true. We're going through all these papers, right? And Eyre is sitting there, and it's mid-December, and I'm keeping my cool, and I'm saying nothing because I'm just a little junior, and so on and so on. Anyway, long story short, he comes up with one remark about 2/3 of the way through the process. It seems Father Christmas has come early. Now, it's a wry piece of English understatement that says, excuse me, you're bumping up all these students from a lower second to an upper second, or from a third to a, whatever grade system you want to keep, you're being far too generous. As an external examiner, I've got to rein you guys in. And I'm going, oh, that's interesting. He's actually being a bit human here. Human in the sense of actually going, yes, we've got to be evaluative in what we're saying. We're not just giving out lollies, we're giving out degrees. And it kind of, because language truth and language logic and truth was, oh God, it's ditch water. It's so dull. But that's not the point. The poor man is actually constricted in his academia. But suddenly, in an academic context, when he's now retired, it's the 1980s, for goodness sake, and he's been flown out as the external examiner to keep the Department of Religious Studies honest. And I'm there too, because I'm a local ring-in. And it's hilarious. Father Christmas has come early. So, yes, it's inhuman, but also he had a sense of humor, thank God. Enough from me.
Thank you for that, Brian.
We have several times pointed out that a lot of these philosophical systems that artificially close the circuit prematurely close the circuit on the problem of evil. When we were previously talking about Kant, that of the classical philosophers, Kant seemed to be the only one who tried to include evil in his philosophical description of the world, even though most Christians would say, and Tom would certainly say, evil is absurd. It won't fit. By its very nature, it won't fit. So, Mr. Eyre, if you're trying to work out mathematical equations with not bigger and greater and less than, and suddenly evil inserts its absurdity into your formulas, it all turns to mush. And so many people say, if it cannot bear the test of evil, it's not worth teaching to the next generation. Just go find somebody else that can at least be honest on those grounds. Positivism as an ism is to say you cannot talk about evil in a positivist dialogue because evil is negative, and you cannot have negative comments in a positive conversation. It ceases to be positive. These are the kinds of things that a much wider, free-ranging discussion could go on. Tom doesn't want to go there at this time because that's not what he's doing. He is trying to say there is such a thing as a scientific method, and Christian theology can be done according to the canons of the scientific method with honesty and integrity, because the scientific method, when it's not forced into serving ideological ends, is an essentially open-ended system, and it can pretty well accept anything and anybody as long as they are willing to lay their cards on the table and say, this is where we're going with this. So let's have a look.
Can you just comment on who Professor Ritchie is? He dialogues with him, so I just wondered, can you give any sense of who is this dialogue partner?
I can't because, and I did try to look him up. He cites him twice in here, and apparently he had a certain celebrity in academic circles as a historian of philosophy.
Okay.
Just running to my problem of my paper library is that I am helpless with if the indexer of the book I'm grabbing thought it was not worth indexing or listing them in the index. So I recommend to you the Encyclopedia of Philosophy, or just Google him and see what comes up.
Okay.
Obviously, when he quotes him and he doesn't say, and he's not being the least bit apologetic, and he really does think, if I quote him, I get a pass on this next allegation I'm going to make. He assumes that Mr. Ritchie is an authority he can quote.
Good.
All right.
Thank you.
The first point, and it's probably the only point he wants to make in this section 3.1, is that there is an obvious and fundamental distinction between general science, the scientia generalis, and the specialized sciences, plural, the scientia specialis, a distinction we can affirm and must not allow to be blurred. Have you ever heard of these terms before? No. No, I spelled
Yes.
good. Oh, good. Was it stitched on the bottom of your mattress or something? What? Where did you find it?
He's
The
studied under
answer is
Alistair McGrath.
unfortunately, I've sat with philosophers of science, not just Alistair, but others. A lovely Jewish Russian extraction in Melbourne who is a polymath on a par with Alistair, but a medical colleague of my wife's. So, I mean, I have these bizarre connections, Ken, that kind of, yeah, they do. I mean, look, they're nutty. I mean, I call it providence and I just enjoy it.
I tried looking in the index of Polonier's personal knowledge, and again, I'm at the mercy of whoever indexed it, but it did not come up. I looked in several long lists of theological terms. It's not a theological term, and my library is tilted very heavily in the direction of theology. I have one massive encyclopedia of science. It does not show up. The one takeaway I had from that is after 1,200 printed pages of the history of philosophy of science, it goes way over on into all the scientia specialis. There is no article in it about the scientia generalis. It doesn't even come up. So obviously, it's a technical term. These are technical terms.
I suspect also Tom uses it because he wants to talk about abstraction. Okay? Because that's the key here. An abstraction. And from the word abstraction, you can also get the word mathematical. But there's something else I want to say about maths later, how maths in fact interacts, genuine maths interacts with the empirical observable world. It's brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Hence my comment, mathematics was waiting for a mathematician to arrive. I mean, wow. Absolutely, wow.
Now, you'll notice
Also, I think even if the term generalis does not appear, I think the idea of a unified science was prevalent, I think, in the early
Very.
20th century.
oh yeah,
There's a whole series of books written by philosophers about the unified approach, and Ayer and those guys contributed to it
Mhm.
because the general idea was there is one field of general knowledge, and positivism, I think, is one outgrowth of that. Is that one way to approach that is to reduce everything to a logical language, and if you can express everything in that reductionistic way, that's the way to unify the different specialties.
Yeah. If I could just flag that you had to use the term reductionist in
Yes.
order to comment on the history of this movement at the end of the movement, when it's finally judged to be reductionist. They would have resisted. They would have said, we're not being reductionist, we're just being honest. There's
Well, they would say that it was just the beginning.
Yeah.
Right? They would say that it's just the beginning,
Yeah.
and that just like in math, you need axioms and you need simple premises. You need to build upon it. And a la Russell and Whitehead's Principia Mathematica, it takes a whole book. But obviously, it was, the idea was that you could then build on it, but in practice, it was not feasible.
Yeah, and it was apparently only mathematicians and certain philosophers who pursued that. But Einstein and physicists found that a useless concept and moved on, or essentially blew it up. Gödel's theorem, which was popularized in the 1930s, for crying out loud, should have told them that you cannot have an airtight sealed system with all its axioms carefully expounded and declared, because they have no meaning without reference outside of their own system, which immediately blows the whole thing up. Tom does spend some time.
Brydon's got his hand up there if you want to grab him. Well, he's got a quote ready to read there, I can see.
I do. Ken and Marty and the whole group refer to page 114, footnote number 1, where he has a beautifully simple juxtaposition of scientia specialis and scientia generalis. So, you've got the many special sciences and this one general science, and he's got a footnote that says, hey, this is what I'm trying to drive at. There you go.
Yeah.
It's wonderful.
In Tom's handling, he says that both of these terms are meaningful. Both of these terms are interrelated to each other. Elsewhere, he will say you cannot do a special science without general science, and you cannot do general science without the special sciences. They are bound together. Where you find the one, you find the other. And so any kind of early positivist philosophy that thought eventually all the general special sciences would yield up their juice, as it were, their liqueur, into one general science that would provide the methodology for all of them, you were doomed to fail. It was not going to happen. And he keeps pointing back to Einstein in particular, but also Polanyi and a few others, to say people who actually were doing science saw this coming a mile away and said, don't go there. And they went ahead and went there. But that, other than, let's just go through my notes here. Has everybody finally got a chance to get my notes in front of them, or are we still?
Dwayne, do you have a quick comment to make there?
Yeah, just backing up what Ken's saying, again, for other people, just another way of saying it. because the problem is you don't start with specialization, you start with the general to the special. And that's the problem. When you get these inquiries backwards, you get a cult forming because you got that closed system. And like he's saying, it's that reference external that correlates to reality. Because John McKenna used to harp on me because he was doing this interface stuff. And that was the thing. Like he told me, don't specialize, make sure you get enough general knowledge, and there's different knowledge so you can apprehend this knowledge. But because you don't have the proper correction, and he's taking his lead from Tom in the scientific theology, like that was John McKenna's stuff he cut his teeth on.
No, those of us that have read Ground and Grammar of Theology, his second chapter on the emergence of from a cultural split, he lays out another historical overview a decade later, and in the meantime he's had lots of other people giving him input. He's weighing this stuff. He's saying essentially, one of the books we read, Marty, sometime in the last 2.5 years, and it might have been one of the little monographs from that Science and Theology in Dialogue.
Yeah.
That's pointed out that real scientists oscillate from the general to the specific, to the general to the specific, to the general, and they do not try to privilege either one. Because each time they oscillate back,
you know why that is, Ken?
The general has changed.
It's the a posteriori, because it's diffusus, catafusis. It's your experience that oralate. It's like after the resurrection. He told them, I go away, but you're not going to follow me. When I come back, you'll know, and you'll be happy. But it's always looking back. That's what you can see. And that's the problem where because sin has to create your own eschatology, they're trying to create their utopia, and they'll never come to it because they can't get back to the foundation that we're on our own, only depart from the living God, and that's the source of all knowledge and wisdom. Well, a priori.
Now, and you've made a righteous judgment as a Christian theologian. But
yeah, I dabble in science. I'd rather be a theologian than a scientist. Where the ball fall down, gravity works.
Polanyi and Einstein would agree with you on the method. And their main point is that when you do not allow your generalizations to be modified by your specializations, and you do not allow the questions in your specializations to be affected by generalizations that have altered since the first time you went to them, you have silenced nature. You are not doing science. You are essentially circling around at the top of a funnel that's just going to keep dropping you lower and lower to an already predetermined goal. Real science needs to be open and listening at both ends of the oscillation, and revising both of these features in dialogue with other generalizations from other sciences. And he will say that this might be a time, Brian, to talk about mathematics, that most physicists knew they had to know mathematics. And Einstein always felt guilty that he was not a mathematician. I'm trying to, was it? Sorry, old age, can't remember.
Torrance's word for that is discovery. Science is discovery. I mean,
right.
Right.
So to look at the method, the essentially open dialogue of genuine theological conversation, as he puts it here, it is that there is this scientia generalis and a scientia specialis, always held together, always active and at work in the inquiring mind, looking for knowledge. So let's have a look here.
Still on 107, or are you on 108 now?
Let me look. 108. There is a typo in that. There is one world of nature which lies behind and requires a corresponding unity in our knowledge of it. But within this world, there are different classes of things with their peculiarities, providing different subject matter and therefore requiring different branches of science appropriate to them, each with its own scope and its distinctive characteristics in method. That's page 108. But in that, he has just finished talking about Aristotle. He said even Aristotle knew this. I mean, this is not profundity springing full grown from the brow of Zeus. This is the long, hard slog of human experimentation and thousands of years of human history. Things get different over there than they are over here. We need to account for that. But they all seem to be heading in the same direction. We need to account for that. How do we do that? There's been all sorts of things, and he wants to rule out a few boneheaded mistakes because they will come back to bite us. So
Aristotle's word organon, in a sense, was that the nature of the tools that keep that dynamic alive, right? Which in a nutshell, we could say it's always a human studying that which is other than the human. And there are many things we're studying, so we need something appropriate to each of those things that we're studying. I mean, that's the shorthand of the long sentence.
And Tom throws in a cute little humanizing thing that Aristotle liked. He liked biology. He liked flowers. So he wanted a science that included flowers and birds and trees. It wasn't all going to be rocks and elements. It just helped. A nice little touch there, but there's some reason why his influence over Western culture has endured for 2,000 years despite the problems. All right. Now,
it's just the beginning of learning a process, and Aristotle began that process using language that categorized, and he gave us tools that needed to be continued to be developed.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it's in the previous chapter where Tom points out when Aristotle gets fused with Plato, so that Plato's eternities and Aristotle's constants and categories get absolutized, medieval science comes to a halt. They're not able to innovate any further in that direction, especially with the weight of the church standing over it and saying, the earth is in the center of everything. You know that. It says that in the Bible, and we just told you as the church, so don't you mess. Seriously. Galileo, don't mess. Copernicus, go, make watches, do something else.
So just to make that sense, when you abstract and absolutize things, then there's one way it is. Like when clients walk in, they say, all men or all women like this or want this. That's an absolutizing of a principle that then nothing can be said. And of course, it's not true, but it is put forth as though it's a undeniable absolute in its abstract form. And that's what happens when you go where it is that you were saying happens.
Yeah. And the point Tom wants us to get to is to ask, along with most scientists, how are these two spheres of scientific activity to be coordinated? That was his term. I added, or ranked, or prioritized, or related. It's science in general looks for evidence.
It's the ordering for him.
Sorry?
Or it's the ordering for him. I mean, that's kind of the word.
The word he comes to prefer. Yeah.
Yeah.
I did notice his language, even within this chapter, incrementally evolves as he shifts from topic to topic. That I just did not have time to go back and do a timeline of the possible conjectural developments of this chapter. So,
right.
Since we're only in the first part.
Yes.
So we can all get aboard that Tom wants us to understand that there is science in general, and they're all the specialized sciences. They do not say the same things, and in some cases, they can't even use the same language. But they all agree that y'all is a science, we is a science, and together we are doing science because there is a certain commonality behind it all. And it is that commonality that he's trying to articulate because he says, and theology shares that. But first of all, he wants to say, all right, science in general, that's scientia generalis, looks for evidence which points to unities in nature or simplicity, and embrace ever-widening relationships. It goes for universality. Each particular science tends to cultivate its own characteristic methods of investigation, in contrast, and jealously guard its own modes of thinking. It stakes out its turf and does not like invaders coming into that turf. That's on page 109. Jealous is what he calls it. How to articulate unity in diversity and diversity in unity without neglecting either aspect. Yeah, he does here quickly go over several failures, things that just didn't work, mostly from Enlightenment philosophy. Explore these older unity schemes. Usually
the Reformation also. The Reformation took a misstep. When it released nature from God, it introduced a dualism that was problematic. That's another point he makes.
No, but he does say in detaching the medieval God from nature, he liberated nature now to be explored by the true custodian of this scientia naturalis, human beings. We now can do it. God has not got a thumb on the scale anymore. It's been taken off. That he doesn't put that very clearly here. Some of that was in the previous chapter, and some of it is from other stuff we read. And I got to admit, I mean, poor Elmer Collier. I mean, every time he brings up a topic, he has to say, he says this in several different ways in several different places. I'm going to try to give you the clearest one that I've got a handle on, and then use the index. All right, just use the index and the table of contents, and look at my reading list at the end, because he's all over the map sometimes. But basically, he's right.
I want to get Dwayne in there at some point when you get a break. He's got had his hand up for a
That's
bit
good.
there.
Then we're going to go on to
Go ahead,
I
Dwayne.
just want to just support what you're saying, because it's like what Kerry Magruder talks about when you hear his lectures on creation, because it's that leveling that, like, if people would take seriously from inanimate to animate and purpose and the way holding what's the environment versus the people that are engaged in the environment, having dominion over the environment, with the one who gave them dominion over them, who have the dominion in the environment, that leveling, because it's the order above that determines the meaning below. That's why Christ, as the mediator between God and man, and being both man and God, he's the one who can bring us the message, what the whole purpose of everything, because he knows the meaning and intention of the first creation, but he also is the source of the new creation, and so the theology there fits in where we do our job as a priest of creation to understand how it works. And so we can cut that tree down and make toothpicks if it's really necessary, or else we can start a fire. But, we're not going to say our ancient forefathers live in that tree, like the way that ancient cultures live. Like, it makes a huge difference. And then it opens up everything for possibility. And that's what Tom is going for, because all this knowledge, it's not taken in isolation. Yeah, in those specific categories of that specialized science, it has to be interconnected with the leveling or the piece puzzles that hold biology, science, or chemistry and physics, and then medicine and pharmacy, and administration process and ergonomics for how doctors use their tools and sanitize. It all fits together in all the theory of everything.
You mean strata by leveling? When you use the word leveling,
strata,
you mean the strata.
because they're all interconnected, but somehow they have to go through 2 or 3 levels. But it's the order above that determines the meaning. Kerry does a really good job explaining that stuff.
Yeah, but I just want to flag that and say that is mature theology. And the key and the tell on that is he can talk about above, and higher, and movement and conversation and dialogue between higher and lower. Within nature, you cannot read high or low off the surface of nature.
That's Athanasius. If you don't know God as creator, that's one thing. But if you know God as savior, that's what opens everything up until you get that.
Athanasius does not have a degree in physics from Harvard University. And that's what we're looking at here.
Yeah.
We will get to Athanasius, and Tom will get to Athanasius in about
sorry for preempting it.
years.
Yeah.
All right. He's got to lay out the problem first, and then he can start looking for the answers. And the problem is that science, real science, values profundity and simplicity. How do you get to the profundity? How do you keep the simplicity? How do we just preserve the distinction of general and special without specifying too heavily what keeps it, how the particular sciences will relate to science in general? And the real kicker is, how does one particular specialized science, like biology, relate to another specific science, like ecology? There are over and over and over again in the daily practice of most science, you end up with one scientist and another scientist arguing about the same point, and two things have to be true at the same time, or they have nothing to talk about. But if two truths have to be true at the same time, are you still doing science? Tom is saying, of course you are. That's how it works. Brian.
Just three things that are coming out of the woodwork here that actually need to be tied up. Firstly, the actuality and possibility stuff is important because it enables discovery. And I think that is what is driving Tom in this section as well. New knowledge. We reach new knowledge because we come up with a hypothesis. Einstein's essay, 1916, oh, we better give it a whirl. And this guy, Edison, off he goes with his boats and he takes photographs during an eclipse. The empirical now and the hypothetical theoretical interact beautifully. We've discovered something, folks. Hallelujah.
Yeah.
So we build, but it's also something else that Dwayne threw in. Because always the stratified level above gives meaning to the stratified levels below, and I'm quoting Alistair, who's quoting Roy Bashkar here, you have this extraordinary problem that people, when they think of above, they think of abstractions, not actually ontological realities. And I think this is one of the big things that Tom wants to educate us about.
Yeah.
Thirdly, when language is inhibiting, Tom just quietly goes, excuse me, these are just phases of metaphors. I love that expression he comes up with. He's quoting somebody else. And the interactions with these disciplines that Ken, you're grappling with, the languages are using a metaphor that's common, but applied differently. And I think that is also quite liberating. And dear old A.J. Ayer never quite saw that, because he was actually not somebody who understood, with Wittgenstein, you could never describe the aroma of coffee. And I'm quoting Philosophical Investigations. So, there's three things I want to bring to the table quite quickly here that bring, I hope, a degree of order into our discussion where we've reached. Because this is an incredibly compressed few pages, 106 to 116. It is whoa, what's that? Okay. Anyway, enough from me.
So,
So
Tom
Kenneth,
wants,
where does he mention profundity?
let's
You said it on 110, right? Modern
It's on
physics.
it's on the top of the second page on his handout for one.
No, I'm asking in the book.
In the book, yeah.
Is that in relation to relativity? On top of page 11?
No, it's a matter of shallow description versus deep description. Something
So
is.
what I'm looking at is page, you said 110 and following, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Eventually, when we get
So
there.
I don't see profundity, but I see that was precisely what he carried out in his work, top of page 111 on relativity, for it achieved an enormous simplification of prevailing conceptions through a simple yet momentous generalization. Is that what you have in mind there?
Well, it's what Tom is trying to describe. Yes, that is profound.
So profundity is your word.
No, he uses it elsewhere, but unfortunately, it's not indexed.
You're muted, Dryden.
Brian,
You're muted.
mute.
Brian, you're muted.
Okay, sorry about that. I'm cutting him off my.
You're
Bill,
profound yet silent.
very good, Bill. If you go to 112, brother, if you
What's that?
if you read 112,
Okay.
and you're in the top quarter of the page. A limited range of physics built up on the mechanical model for the profounder natural science becomes, the more it must be prepared, blah, blah, blah. So
Right.
you've got the interaction between the observable and what you're getting is a destruction, please note, a destruction of false assumptions. I'm
Yes.
paraphrasing
Yeah.
because
Yeah,
I'm taking Tom and I'm extrapolating to where I think he should be going. Oops. Oh dear, did I say that?
I quote this whole block here about halfway down the second page. The
Okay,
word
thank you.
profound appears on the fourth line. So I'm so glad. Thank you, Brian, for pointing that out.
No. We're on a roll.
Yeah.
So it's 112 versus 110.
Something like
yes, I'd have to go
Okay.
back and see.
Okay.
110 and following. Well, if 112 is follows
What?
110, I'm good. But
Okay.
my editor will probably flag
Thank
that.
you. Thank you, Bryden.
Now I got to trying to jump over a whole bunch of briar patches to get to his main point here. In several closely related considerations, Tom observes that with the widening of the question of the relation of the natural sciences to each other and science in general to our broader knowledge and frames of reference, we are all obliged to proceed more philosophically than some scientists are comfortable. And to clarify again the difference between science and philosophy, even as we note how reliant science and philosophy are on each other. That's because they're back to our conversation about positivism and scientism is they don't want philosophy. They want it all basic axioms laid out explicitly. But happily, we keep a philosopher in the broom closet, and every once in a while, if I need some philosophy, I just come on out. Give me a good creative ontology here. But here are some samples of the kinds of issues that are being mooted all over the place, and we're then still on. Since there are multiple special sciences, how do we unite them? How do we unite all this diversity? Is there such a thing as one uniform method? People have been searching for that for 60, 70 years. That's still out. Is there a super science, say mathematics, that can unify all the special sciences? Tom says flatly, no. I'm not looking for a super science. That is simply is creating a third something in order to handle the two things you couldn't get straightened out to begin with. You're not going to be able to transcend it by inventing a third one that knocks the other two together. Now, science and mathematics, Brian, this is where you get mathematics. How do we relate nature and number? Descartes thought that every bit of science had to have mathematics included with it, or it wasn't really science. But that may be true eventually, fundamentally, somewhere down the line, artificial intelligence will find the math behind it all. But right now, it's not there. Yet nobody is pointing fingers and saying, if you don't have a spreadsheet at the end of your dissertation, I'm not accepting it as science. It's just not, it's not where we are. But so is math superior or more revelatory than material observation? Most people would say no. And Einstein himself said the proof of good mathematics is that you can find a physical example of what you're talking about with math in ellipses, in conic sections, in conic sections. I'll leave it at that. That demonstrated to him that there was mathematical order in the physical universe, but it was suggested tacitly. He could not demonstrate that the fact that there is such a thing as a conic section causes a comet coming in to circle around the sun would describe the parabolic path that it takes. That's just going too far with not enough evidence. But the promise is always there. Good. Everybody loves math.
I don't.
Everybody okay? You know what? This one I liked here. The promise of quantum theory to unify science. E equals mc squared. Is one of the most profound unities discovered in the early 20th century. No one understood what he was talking about. The quantum theory unified science on a basis that essentially threatened the ability of science to talk to the general public. And the deeper and deeper the specialized sciences go in their unique vocabularies and their conversations with each other until they're talking about the A version of the string theory versus the B version of the string theory. And most people are standing outside the door going, are these people on high on something? Find out what they're getting and get me some, because they are having a whale of a good time. Does this consign every particular science to its own shrinking intellectual ghetto and the loss of a general audience? The fact that we won't require science in the high schools anymore? Is this a breakdown of communications? How do we as a political society allocate funding for scientific endeavor if we can't talk about what science is? This is a big problem.
I have a question for you right there. When you talk about the loss of the general audience, my sense of what general science is supposed to do is serve humanity. The nature of science, when people say, I just want to know knowledge for knowledge's sake alone, it's like that does not sound scientific. And so to say, losing the general audience is losing a basic of what I would call the general task of science, that is to understand the world and to serve humanity in understanding it and how we live within it, care for it, all of those other practices. Is that fair to say that that is part of what a proper science does? It gives us a knowledge that allows us as humans to use that knowledge in ways that in some way facilitate caring for the world, or it caring for us, or caring for each other. Is service a fair thing to write into the general task of science?
Running it through my filters. The first comment is that's not a question Tom asks.
Well, it is theologically. I mean, the nature of God in the person of Jesus Christ. Ultimately, if we just say, I don't want a God who interrupts, you may say he wants to serve. He's going, no, if we don't serve humanity by letting God speak, then we have become destructive of humanity. So it's implicit in, I think, what he's building here. And that's why I raise it at this point. And to say, I think my sense is that the world of certainly medicine and many areas, they want good science because they want to serve humanity. And so the question is, does that go all the way to the general sense that science is gaining knowledge because in having that knowledge, humanity is served?
Actually, Marty, can I answer your question?
Go for it.
Think in terms of homo faber, homo religiositas, homo scholasticus, because that's another way we can level these abstractions into the man who does these things, whether they're a biologist, a scientist, a geologist, a doctor, a priest, a prophet, Melchizedek priest in the heavenly realm in the true sanctuary. All that meaning comes from that man downward. He is par excellence man, the real man, the one who knows God and man. And so when you're talking about that practical knowledge, because when you're talking about this, I don't care what a first class lever is. Just give me the spanner. I need to unloosen this nut. Because it's all about education. Everything we know to define the reality, how we interact with the creation, that's all part of our specialized, unique knowledge. And you can choose whatever you want to do. You're into, like, your knowledge of the human being and asking the right question. Why are you angry at your husband? Why are you angry at your wife? You ask them the right question. It's not that they don't know, but no one's told. You're asking the wrong question, friend.
So you're saying yes. it is for service. I'm hearing that underneath everything you're saying, it's yes,
Yeah,
science, as with education, serves the nature of the
yeah,
human.
it
And so
has
the
a
Christian
purpose.
frame of mind, Ken, you're holding up there.
Yeah, I look at different areas where this applies, that's what Tom was working, because this
Yeah.
knowledge isn't just for knowledge's sake, it's for the glory of God, to learn how to worship and love one another. So, you can't avoid that question, whether Tom can't address this, but that's where the mediation of Christ comes in, to tell you from the top down what everything means. But then
I'm just going to insist that in 1968, 1969, that is not what Tom was worried about. He had other fish to fry. By the time he gets to the Christian frame of mind, or his mature works, I mean, the Christian doctrine of God is a symphony in every chapter, melodiously expounding essentially the humanity of God, in the godliness of humanity, in united in the Holy Spirit for the sake of the creation. The man, the priest of creation, it has a big chapter in here. But this book is written 10 years later. He's got lots of other things he's been thinking about. And right here, right now, because he's only got so many pages. And Marty, you know what it's like when the editor says, no, I needed 100 pages shorter.
Do know.
No, that he's got to make this distinction stick. There is general science and the particular sciences. They're not the same thing, but they do communicate constantly, or they are essentially two phases of the same thinking. They cannot be divided. He wants that because Christian theology does the same thing. And he does not want Christian theology thrown out of court for being unscientific, because it tries to do two things at the same time.
So my question was
real
raised
science
because
does two things. Sorry.
he raises the question of this distinction that he sees as a profound problem of distinguishing observation and thought, which is really where he says dualism begins in the world. And it felt like at that point, thought is the meaningful life of service that doesn't just collapse into the object. That when George Hunsinger says he doesn't understand dualism, that the seed, in a sense, is right here, right at the beginning of our method. If you separate observation and thought, you lose the meaningfulness of the service of what science is supposed to be doing. And in taking them apart, you no longer serve and you bring in other agendas.
Mhm.
And so it seems like we're right at the seed of the thoughts that is going to, as you say, develop later.
Mhm.
But I wonder if we're not right at the beginning, where the loss or the creation of a distinction between observation and thought that creates the dualism is the loss of the meaningfulness that science is supposed to serve in holding observation and thought together so that it can do the work that good science does. That was where my thought was coming from.
Well, at this stage, I would say it's science is functionally atheist. It has no skin in the game between belief and unbelief. It's a method. And the question, and the main point Tom wants to say is that, and Christian theology does not need to be afraid of that method just because most science is functionally atheist. All of our law courts in the United States are functionally atheist, but we as Christian and church people don't worry about that because we don't think that that's a dangerous thing for our society to have. There are some people out there who do and want to change it. And so,
my point is that in that atheist decision to distinguish between thought and observation is the fracture that allows for atheists to think they can function in a way that closes the door and they're being more scientific. That in fact, Tom is seeing as this is just a problem where you close the door, that you don't have to be Christian to get it, but you can't close it and be scientific. And if you leave it open, then the road forward for theological science is still open. So, I mean, that's kind of what I'm seeing here.
Well, okay. Then this is chapter 3, section 1. Got 2 more sections to go before we even leave this chapter. And we've got, 3 more chapters after that?
Yes, we do.
Let Tom take up the topics he wants to take up in the order in which he takes them. this is how we learn how his thought grows.
Good for you. I
but it-
applaud that, Kenneth. Well, I applaud you for bringing us back to that time and time
And,
again. Well done.
and if I may add to what Bill is just affirming, when you ask the question of service, Marty,
Yes.
we have to bear in mind two other things simultaneously. Again, I want to corral where our conversation is. Namely, the human enterprise is over time. So you come up with a square root of -1 and it gets applicable decades later. Secondly, that indicates also it's a corporate collective exercise. Polanyi, science, faith, and society.
yeah,
And it's always, always, always one part of the body, the little finger, and the nose. Well, hang on, I don't need to smell, says the little finger. Well, how stupid. I mean, sorry. So I have to quietly say again, service is an extraordinarily general thing. And if we again abstract service in a way that precludes certain forms of service, I mean, I'm looking at a commentary on the Song of Songs this morning, which is ridiculous. No, it's not. It's in the Hermea series from Fortress, and it's a profound piece of work, but I'm not going to buy it. But, lexicographical Hebrew distinctions. Okay, yes, darling, you got it nailed. Hat tip, well done. But how does it serve lovers who are passionately in love with each other? Well, it probably doesn't, but that's okay.
that's okay.
That's
My
okay.
point for right here is that the methodological point here is that science is about discovery, and discovery is another word for service. So I'm trying to really make the point that he's making here.
Ah,
I'm not trying to divert from it. I'm trying to clarify so that we get the proper sense that Torrance is laying out foundationally the task of science, and when properly done, there is discovery, and we don't collapse into abstractions or get caught up with specifics that lose context and unity, but that it allows for a community of discovery, and that God, the study of God, lies within that discovery process. So anyway, I'm trying to clarify those distinctions within the point that he's making in this section. So I'm not
yeah.
trying to
And
go
also,
beyond it. I'm trying to hear the depth of what he's saying.
I will say that 2 or 3 or 4 weeks back when I couldn't join you guys, missional realities is what drives Tom. And the mission of the context of 58 to 68 is a confusion that we've inherited regarding what science is and what science actually is not.
Yeah.
And I mean, and I think,
The
Ken, you're
theology,
right.
yeah, the theology that was being taught at Union Theological Seminary when Tom came there to do this lecture was Paul Tillich and Reinhold Niebuhr. And Reinhold Niebuhr had no dogma at all. And Paul Tillich was making everything relational, yeah, but only by analogy. And I delight sometimes in noting that the early books of Tom, like this one, Theological Science, he still cites Tillich without criticism. Even though Karl Barth already was saying, I wish somebody would whisper something into Tillich's ear about X, Y, or Z. That was a contemporary quote we got from Evangelical Theology and Introduction. He said that at Union Theological Seminary in 1963, and they didn't carry him out on a log. The theology that occupied the head of Reinhold Niebuhr when he sat in his chair outside of the Secretary of State, advising him on what to do about atomic weapons, was not the theology of this, not yet. And it would have really helped, I think, but that's a hypothetical. We'll never know.
Yeah.
Meantime, Tom is just making the points he can make with the tools he has at the time when he has it. And it really, really does excite me to see where he's going to go with this. And I hope that one way we can pursue that is then take up the next 2 books that he wrote, which is space-time and incarnation, and God and rationality, and see how much further he gets in only 4 years, because he's burning it up. But in the meantime, I want to make sure that we do get the point he wants to make here.
Yes. So keep
Can I
going.
just quickly add why God and rationality is so good and why you're waving it around today? Because metaphor and symbol and analogy and correlation and all that stuff doesn't necessarily land on the actual concrete and the actual empirical. And that's the trouble with Tillich. Your ultimate concern could be a complete mythological fiction.
Yeah.
And of course, you see, this is what Tom wants to say to us. Thought is fabulous. Imagination is necessary, but it has to land somewhere.
Yeah.
And that's where service comes in. It has to land somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
In this section, discovery.
Yeah.
The
Yeah,
method
yeah.
of general science and specific science is discovery, and that's where we're going. So keep going there, Ken.
All right. So he says on page 112, there are only particular sciences. But these particular sciences all have certain fundamental principles in common, for all knowledge has a certain structural form in order to be knowledge at all. Now, he has not used any relative terms like higher or lower, or above or below. He's simply saying they're all related, and you cannot take one without taking all of them in their relation. Within the whole realm of knowledge, it is obvious that natural science has its own and a profound unity, in spite of its manifoldness or plurality. Although the understanding of that unity has been greatly altered by the discovery of the limited range of physics built up in the mechanical model, that is Newton's model. For the profounder natural sciences become, the more profound natural science becomes, the more it must be prepared to be concerned with the unobservable, with the non-objectifiable. In this, again, we're talking about how do we communicate this to the general public. It's easy to say, to do, use dry ice to demonstrate cryogenics or something like that. It's very observable. But the logic behind E equals mc squared cannot be observed. It's not observable, it's not objectifiable, but it is fundamental to our understanding of the universe in which we inhabit. That, when you get finally to the Christian doctrine of God, Tom relies on that enormously, that almost everything he wants to say about the God of the Christians is unobservable and cannot be objectified. And that is why he knows it must be true, because it's beautiful. But moving on. At least in the sense of those terms used in the old Newtonian framework. This makes it all the more necessary to discern the principle of demarcation between the special sciences and to work with a clear and applicable distinction between the scientia generalis and the scientia specialis. He's repeating that over and over and over again. There is a distinction to be made. We must keep that distinction. He has not told us why. That's still to come in another section. But so he's making the point and he's pounding our little heads with it. Maintain this distinction, because scientists have to, in order to feel like they are groping and seeing and developing and growing and really doing science instead of just doing little class bead games in their heads. That distinction needs to hold. Well, we shall be concerned with a principle demarcation that is applicable not only to the world of natural science, but to the whole universe of knowledge, and must include, and this is the Geistwissenschaften, Did I get all the vowels? Geist des Wissenschaften. The knowledge of the spiritual. The spiritual is not observable. The spiritual is not objectifiable. But there is a Wissenschaft of the Geist. The Germans use it all the time. And that is where theology also can find a happy home. The human sciences, anthropology, sociology, psychology, these are all Wissenschaft. And they include theological science, and not to speak, of course, of philosophy. That was a little, I think, a little ding on his way out the door. So that's the main point, but he's still got a few points he wants to make, and I wanted to
Can I just interject at this point, because I think 112 is absolutely brilliant, and you cite it in your notes. The non-observable, however, yes, we mightn't get E equals mc squared, but when a film like Oppenheimer gets produced,
yeah,
and the atomic bomb gets displayed as to how it got developed, and we the producer and the director refuse to tell us what happens in that conversation down by the lake as a dramatic suspense moment, we get told right at the end of the film what happens down by the lake and the conversation that Einstein had with Oppenheimer. Now, what's going on here is the observable is itself differentiated. An atomic bomb and its destruction is very observable.
oh yeah,
It's just, sorry. But E equals mc squared that's behind it, well, for goodness sake, who the heck even begins to get it?
yeah.
So I think Tom's point again is to say, look, certain forms of discovery take imagination to new levels and to new heights. Sorry, I'm going to be relativistic. New heights. And if you can't follow, that's fine, Icarus. Your wings will fall off. But meanwhile, take a look at Hiroshima.
Yeah.
So I think we have to be very careful with what we mean by observable and non-observable in this realm of thought versus the observable. That's all I want to say. Thank you, Ken.
The Tom Torrance of 1958 through 1968 is still differentiating between the science of Albert Einstein and the science of Isaac Newton. And
Correct.
we're now considerably past that, and there are lots of people say if he's still stuck back there, he's obsolete.
No, he's not.
I think I'm still learning something, but let's the main point here is we got to. I want to get us through this first part of this chapter so that somebody else can do the next part, because I ain't doing it. That's all right. Who Marty?
Bill's going to take the next part. So
Bill, I'll come. I'll sit here with my little pennant flags. I'll cheer. I'll say, yeah, 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 yeah. But
get your whip out, Bill, and get ready to dominate the conversation. Jawohl, hold to the conversation.
And we'll have Simon after that, I think. Anyway, we've got a bunch of good people coming up. Did you want to say something quickly, Dwayne, before we let Ken?
Just a quick quote here to go with Bryden, because there's an underlying thing that we forget about how this inquiry happens. Without hope, you have no imagination. See, that's a fundamental thing that people don't realize. You can philosophize a hope of utopia, but we already know, like, dude, you're not even coming close. Like, read Kierkegaard, you tell you don't even know what truth is. You couldn't find it in a paper bag. It was said truth. Pick it up. So that key to hope, that's what sets us apart and everything. Even with Ken, he has the hope that we're going to cut short by the, so we have to be continued.
Okay. Back to you,
I
Ken.
would say that that paragraph on 112 is the main point he wants to make, and then he makes two generally accepted statements about the right relationship between scientia generalis and scientia specialis. says all science recognizes a distinction between formal scientific procedures based on the principles of objectivity and material procedures appropriate to each particular science and valid within it. There's the distinction, and he's making two qualifications about what gravitates towards generalis and what gravitates towards specialis. Again and again, he's saying, because they are two sides of the same thing. You cannot proceed without it. Every other special science has its own peculiarities owing to the special features of its object, and theology is one of them. I'm just throwing that in there because this is about the fifth or sixth time he has made this point. Don't tell me that theology is not a science after I just told you what a science is, but scientists tell you what a science is, and now I got to hold up this and say, and theology is a science too. Now, next thing. All science recognizes that the role of the human knower, Marty, this is the subjective, must be taken into account in every particular science. There are general principles of knowledge relevant to every field of knowledge where the human knower is involved. But because we also have to operate within the framework provided by what is known and what is concerned with the nature of the object in each field of knowledge, we must have a particular principles of knowledge relevant to each particular field or object. The Latin phrase there translates, whatever is known according to the mode of the knower. That humanizes it. In this case, it gets us to Kierkegaard, at least. Then thirdly, with scientia generalis and scientia specialis, we are distinguishing between two modes of one scientific procedure. They are bound together. A favorite phrase of Tom's. They are bound together. Wherever there is scientific knowledge, both are found, the generalis and the specialis. And I add an editorial comment. The language that Tom uses here is almost Chalcidian. Two modes of knowing, united in one perception without separation, without alteration, and without confusion. The Council of Chalcedon. Hey, Bryden, I thought you'd be jumping up and down. I don't know.
Biden's old. You can see he's getting weary.
No. What I'm saying
He's in the
is,
future, man. That's why he's tired.
what I'm saying is, can you have reduced us to the silence of adoration?
Oh, if that would just pay my bills.
My one question on the Latin quote, known according to the mode of the knower, how does that not collapse into the categories of the human becoming the basis upon which the claims of scientific investigation would, in a sense, need to fit into categories? And it seems like you're back to Aristotle. I wasn't sure what he was doing with that.
Well, give him another read when we're done here. I think he was using that as a summary point, having already made the point.
You understand my
question,
all right?
Yeah.
I think the mode of the knower is also the mood of the knower. And sorry, my quit was about the mode and mood of adoration and worship. Because when you are worshiping, you are still knowing, you're still the one doing it. But now, where are you? Well, I'm sorry, read the book of Revelation again. I mean, heaven is open. This door is open. This unbelievable thing that's going on. I do have one point. I don't know when I'm going to make it, so I'll shut up and let you keep going.
If I could just throw in one quote that's not in the text that I keep wrestling with in light of it, it's by Sherlock Holmes. Never theorize before you have data. Inadvertently, you end up twisting facts to suit theory instead of theories to suit facts. And there's something about that doing Christological work begins with the facts. And so the nature of the language that one develops out of that, about what it means to be human, what it means for God to be creator, it is the facts that precede it. And that seems to be what I usually hear Katafusan meaning, but it seems as though there isn't that priority of the facts that is at this point being put out, that the general at some level is almost being given a priority. So the particularity, I mean, the nature of particularity in both Barth and Torrance seems to be the point at which science does its work, and we're dealing methodologically here, and that the nature of who we are as human beings is we live with a general knowledge of the world, but when we're doing scientific work, we focus on the actuality and particularity. So I'm trying to understand as a methodological point, beginning this chapter 3, if I'm reading it wrong, or yeah, if he's saying that we do need the particularity in all sciences as a
Yes,
starting
from the
point,
start.
that
No.
Marty,
That's-
I would gently say to you, the word fact is where you're tripping up,
okay.
because the word fact has for you a certain, well, I don't know,
Well, it's
because in
Sherlock
science,
Holmes, so it's a
I know it is.
yeah.
I know, I heard that, because the word fact is a derivative of a hypothesis, which is in fact observable and now demonstrated. So facts cannot exist apart from the hypotheses that give them
Theory.
meaning.
Right.
And I'm not sure that Sherlock Holmes is the best place to go, because the word fact has this very slippery meaning in our culture. It's just the facts. Well, hang on a moment. There's no such thing. Facts do not speak for themselves.
Yeah.
Right.
What they do is
Some
they
facts are
hang.
better than others.
Some facts are definitely better than others. And I mean, we have these euphemistic sayings. And I think Sherlock Holmes, bless his tiny cotton socks, I know the point he's trying to make. At least I think I
Yep.
do. I think I know the point you're trying to make.
Yep.
Tom Torrance is driven by Karl Barth. The actuality determines the possibility. The
Yep.
possibilities determine the discovery of the new. And I think that for me, this is what this section is all about.
I
And
think
the
that's what
observable,
Sherlock is saying too, though. I think he's wanting to say, I have to discover what's going on through the particularities of the actualities that I'm able to
Yeah.
see, and then develop a theory or a theological understanding, which Polanyi would call that indwelling. If I don't indwell the moment and notice, well, let it teach me, then I will not learn. I'll miss what I need to see.
Instead of Sherlock Holmes, Rycroft Holmes. Sherlock got out of his chair and went out and gathered some facts. And half of what he gathered, he probably never used. But he creates theories. And Rycroft stays home and thinks. Now, who's going to get to the truth sooner? That's a classic late Victorian, early 20th century British public school education dilemma between the active life and the passive life. And it makes for great teenage fiction, but it doesn't make for good philosophy. All right. It's just, so.
And this chapter is called, I mean, we're talking about scientific activity. So I'm trying to get the foundation of the nature of the human in the activity of knowing that we see in common with the study of the natural world and God, right?
To make it human knowing, to be it real knowledge, it is not a question of sitting in Rycroft's chair and gathering twigs until he has a pile of twigs this high. And it says,
Yes.
no, I'll begin to make theories. And it's not Sherlock going out and running all over the place. Because the way, if you read Polanyi, if you read, I mean, simply even the tacit dimension, all of the Sherlock Holmes was written by a logical positivist. It was, I mean, he is not the Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Actually, it was something of a spiritualist. He kept seances because you couldn't prove to him that spirits didn't exist because they were invisible, and invisible things can exist. And therefore, if I want to believe that they really exist, they exist. And the fact that they talk to me proves that they exist. Circular logic. You see the problem? If he had kept the oscillation going from the scientia generalis to the scientia specialis from the very start, he'd have a lot better chance of honing in on where he wanted to go and how to go about it and with what tools and what categories than just sitting there collecting twigs. It's just that's what practicing scientists do. And Doyle actually only knew one practicing scientist, the doctor on which he based Sherlock Holmes, and that guy lost all his patients. It's the same. But anyway,
Okay,
can I
press
just say
on.
something here quickly, Marty? And again, because this goes back to Tom's, because getting back to staying where Tom is right now, he's developing his tools of the craft.
Yes.
When you invent new words, those are part of your tools in the craft, and that's the hard part because he's pioneering. Because we already went through the story of his biography. He wanted to do this when he was 24. We couldn't do that when we were 24. I don't know what any man could do when they're 24, but as we see him maturing, and this is where Ken's going, where he's not a static creature. He's a man who's on a mission. And as he goes further, he clarifies, corrects, clarifies. He throws out the turd and holds on to the treasure. And so you're catching him on a train ride that's relative. And you got to follow where his words are going,
Yeah.
this onto relationship between everything discerned through the logos, who is made by, for everything is made. The Lord Jesus Christ. We're on this journey.
No, I appreciate the conversation. It's the clarity of thought about how we do the task well.
Yeah.
And people they love Sherlock Holmes because it feels like he has insight that goes beyond what is normally observed. And at some level, it seems like,
yes,
right, but at some level, Tom is wanting us to see a God who people say, well, I can't see God. It's like, okay, well, we have to look in the right places. We have to look at the particulars. And so I'm just wanting to find appropriate language to the nature of the task as we enter into this task of the activity of scientific and theological work.
Well, isn't he contrasting the mode of the knower with the mode, as he puts it, theology must have a particular principles relevant to this unique object. And he's talking about, therefore, we're concerned with a mode of knowing appropriate to his unique nature, meaning God's nature.
Yep.
So he's contrasting the mode of the knower in secular fields, perhaps we could say, with the mode of knowing in theology. Yes?
Yeah. That the knower needs to be saved, needs to be rescued, needs to be redeemed, is part of the mode of the knower. And what that knower knows about God is very much colored by that mode, that fact. It is possible to give it a Christian reading, but it was, he says, as the old medievals used to say it. I looked all over my shelves for one medieval that actually said it, but unfortunately, again, they don't index the Latin in my collection, so I had to go online. It'll be, eventually we will find somebody, but I think we've done enough to establish over cleanly, and again, print out the handout and read it through, and put in all my little typo corrections, because the main point he wants to make is that there is a scientific method. It's broadly agreed upon, that scientists agree upon. And people who want to, as it were, steal around behind the back of the scientists and grab their method without consulting them are doing themselves no favors, and they're doing the scientists no favor, because it just adds on to this anti-science, anti-expert attitude of a lot of people that they don't know nothing. And why should I listen to them?
And you're just saying that he agrees that there's a knower, a mode of knowing, and a known. Is that right?
Yeah, that would be a philosophical generalization. What do you
A
call
starting
it?
point. Yeah.
A truism.
But that sentence down at the first full paragraph 113 down at the bottom, in theology we're concerned with God and Jesus Christ as the truth, and therefore we are concerned with a mode of knowing appropriate to his unique nature.
Yep.
Yeah.
Actually,
You
well,
know,
Bill, think about John 8, because that key word is truth. You shall know
Who?
the truth if you continue in my word, because it's you have to participate in
yeah,
the
I get,
truth. It,
yeah,
so it's the same nature with you being a biologist. If you want to know about sea cells, you got to walk along the seashore and pick up some shells, and then you're going to make some observations to add to your theory to correlate. But the more experience you get, the more you know, because this and it's relational, and it's bound by time because you can't know everything simultaneously now. It's after you have to encounter Jesus, and because he asked that question, who do you say that I am? And we all have different answers because we're at different places on the continuum as our inquiry of the Lord Jesus Christ. Who is this one? He's more than a
yeah,
man. Is he
I
God?
get that.
So so like that's the appropriate way. You like it's assuming you're a Christian and you're following the Bible and you know that Jesus, the Logos, the ordering principle behind the creation that made all things for his benefit to the glory of the Father. It's assuming a lot of knowledge that you already know, but he's not going to say this because he has a different audience. He's trying to inquire scientists to understand the correlation between your scientific for the natural world correlates the same knowledge, and we have to use these same kind of knowledge. It's these twos aren't exactly the same necessarily, but these words are specialized once you go past the general knowledge to your specific inquiry. How do you want to know Jesus? You have to give these preconceived notions and assumptions that he is who he said is, and then you understand, and then that truth penetrates into your darkness. So then you understand, yeah, this is true. This is the myth that's beyond. And
I
you're
see him contrasting discovery with revelation here.
Two sides of a coin. Two
well, you have a
sides.
question. Do scientists get revelation from God to move the human history and the human project forward? I think, yeah. But people's biography is very significant. Where you're born and when you're born determines your place in the drama, and then
I
the choice
think,
you
Bill,
make.
if I may interject, disclosure and discovery, I'll change the language deliberately, are a fascinating interplay in the game of what I've posted in the chat, ping pong. In other words, the ping pong that is in fact being a human. We're playing ping pong for the last 2 hours. Bing, 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 bing. It's been fantastic. Dear Ken has given us the balls and the bat, and we're going bing, 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 bing. And I think Tom too is giving us the balls and the bat, bing, 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 bing. Now, the interesting thing about a game of ping pong, it does have resolution. We will come to points where we have to change ends, where we have to have new sets. There are advancements in this business of playing ping pong because the game we're actually playing is one of disclosure and discovery. And the form of disclosure is one of incredible humility, where the God of the universe says, I've emptied myself. You better do the same, Bill. Otherwise, you're not off square one yet. And for me, that's Philippians 2, verses 1 to 13. And I mean, it's kind of, whoa, that's a new way of knowing. Well, yes, it is. It is a new way of knowing. But Tom is trying to tell us the humility of science, true science, is the humility of worship, the word I've used before. Yeah. And I'll finish by simply saying this. I do have an agenda that I'll be now posting on the TF Torrance page that discusses the difference and the relationship between scientia and sapientia, two words taken from St. Augustine. And I mean, there we are into something very interesting. But that's not for today because that'll just muddy the waters, folks.
We'll look forward to that. I want Ken to speak to the last point of the one caution about right relation. Can you just make the point that you're wanting to clarify there for us, Ken, before we finish?
It's important not to confuse Scientia Generalis with philosophy. His last 3 pages is that there's something of the popular attitude towards philosophy, that if it's a big, complicated subject, like Scientia Generalis, it has to be a philosophy. And then somehow a philosopher can get around and make sense of it. He's saying, no, that is not general science is not philosophy. And he makes the point, scientific knowledge is bound to the object. Philosophy is not. Science is a way of discovery, a way of attaining new knowledge, but philosophy is a way of thinking without being a way of adding anything positive to our information. Footnote, Alfred North Whitehead, thank you, but I still make this point. He says, another way of distinguishing philosophy from science in general is to note that they handle the same terms and concepts in very different ways. Freedom, authenticity, fidelity, truthfulness. Science is rooted in experience and existence. It is never without factual and experimental reference. And these things, factual reference, vanish in the philosophical handling of the same terms and concepts. It says it is not that philosophy is counterfeiters or cheats. It's just they are working towards a different end. And I think he ends with a comment that is almost like he cites Collingwood, and I can't put my fingers on it. Oh yeah,
115, 2/3 of the way down, as Collingwood has said.
Clear-sighted essay.
Yeah.
Right. It says it's more appropriate to speak of two phases of a concept rather than two senses of a word. He's trying to stress the unity, the integrity of the term, and the quality of the conversation we're having about the term, even as we develop and modify and keep moving through what we mean by the term. This is how science discovers. But philosophy, unhappily, can go for years without needing to worry about that. In some places, maybe you have.
Can I chip in that he footnotes Wittgenstein very briefly with the blue and the brown books, but I'd love to get Tom around the table and a cup of coffee or a glass of wine, I don't know which, and talking about his philosophical investigations, because the blue and the brown books and the philosophical investigations are equivalent to a quantum leap between this book and Ground and Grammar and the Trinitarian faith and the Christian doctrine of God, because the philosophical investigations encapsulate 50 years of trying to kind of muddle through and finish up way beyond Bertrand Russell and his Principia Mathematica and all that, which he worked together with. And I think as I'm listening to this discussion, I have to keep saying, yes, the aroma of coffee is the aroma of coffee. And all I can say is, brother, give me another cup. Because in the end, I have to go, Wittgenstein, you've done your job, but few of us have actually bothered to read you carefully enough.
Yeah, everybody spoke about him at New College in 1973-74, but I don't know anyone who actually read it.
Well, particularly philosophical investigations, you read it. Whoa! And then, of course, Fergus Kerr comes along and helps us. But I'll shut up.
Bryden, how do you read it? I have the book, but how do you read it?
Oh.
The word isn't the thing.
You literally read it as if it were soliloquies, as if it were, it's very structured, tells you how to read it. It's not a novel, it's not a textbook. He's dipping into stuff. He goes back to stuff that he's dipped into before. It's a whole series of soliloquies.
He's building a framework of how he's seeing the world, and he wants you to understand what he's pointing you to. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, but the framework is also pretty elastic.
Yeah, because you can't define anything till you know more.
Correct, until you've taken another sip of coffee.
Yeah. Cheers to you, brothers.
So I wanna wrap up a bit here. I want to point out next week we have literally coming to us from England, David Munchin, who wrote the book Is Theology a Science? We'll have an article that he published in the Scottish Journal of Theology in 2011. He sent me a copy of that, so we'll have him on. The subtitle, Paul Freyben's, are Anarchic Epistemology is Challenge Test to T.F. Torrance's Scientific Theology. So we have somebody here. I've ordered his book. It's literally been 6 weeks, and they said it's going to be another 4 weeks coming from the UK before it arrives. But so I'm getting, and that book is $175. You'd think they'd get it to me faster. But anyway, you will have the essay. I'll be posting that tomorrow. And so he will be on. Travis did engage him in his doctoral work. So Travis, I think, will be here to talk about that some too. So anyway, it should be a very interesting conversation. I believe he's a priest somewhere in the UK. I can't remember exactly where it is that he is hanging out these days. But anyway, it'll be another exciting engagement with somebody who's engaged with the subjects we're talking about, and enriching our conversation, and has done some serious work as well. So we
Actually,
have
Marty,
that to look.
can
Yes?
you clarify the word exciting for the home viewers? They think we're all
It'll be like
crazy.
coffee. You'll have to drink it and see how it works out. But for today, I want to thank Ken for the work that you have done these last 2 weeks. It's been wonderful. The survey you've given us and the insight, the background that you have brought out for us has all been really very enriching. So with much gratitude, we say thank you to that. So thank you all for being here. Ted, it's good to see you again here today. We have missed you. It's good to see you are alive and getting better, pressing through those challenges. So anyway, it's always a delight to see you with us. So for all of you, thanks for being here, and blessings on you. We'll try and have up all of this good stuff. And also, I think I have I'll have the AI, I think, as well. So anyway, blessings on you and take care.
Thanks again, everybody.
Thank
God
you,
be with
Marty.
all. Cheers.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
God bless.
I love listening in on the side of that. I understand about